What do we think of Mapfield?
¿Qué es lo que pienso de Mapfield?
What is crack? It's your boy D-Murph, and we're back with another episode of the Mapfield podcast. This time we've hit the road and we're down in Limerick. Got a very special guest today. Before we get started, just want to shout out Rira, our sponsors, for sponsoring the podcast and making this episode possible. And yeah, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Brian Cross, also known as B+, photographer, filmmaker, professor, a few other bits and bobs. But yeah, man, happy to be here. Shout out Rira. There.
And what's your crack? What has you back in Ireland? You're living in America at the moment, so what are you back for?
I'm back. I'm back so that my daughter gets to spend some time with her grandfather. But and I'm also working on a documentary at the moment here. So just here for that, really. Just.
Well, what's the extent you can talk about the documentary?
I know I can talk about
it. Yeah.
So the American singing group, the Supremes, came here in 1981, and did a kind of insane tour of the show band circuit. Really, I mean, they played Donegal twice. They played Wexford. They played Tala. They played Lahinch. They played, places that no band, even the Smiths 3 years later didn't play. You know what I mean? But it was right at the middle of the hunger strikes, and basically I teach in University of California, San Diego, and there's a guy who teaches in the music department there who was in the band, and he had kept a photo diary of Ireland in '81, and that was kind of the beginning of it. And so subsequently, I've been working on it for like 3 years now. It's pretty mad. It's just a very interesting kind of collision or coalescing of traditions and histories, and so yeah, I've been trying to make a essay film. I haven't made like a full length doc, like strictly doc, since Brazilian time. So yeah, get my feet wet, and my brain dry again. So
yeah, I mean, something that's really interested me about your work is like how much it's able to expose or like highlight differing sections, relationships with one another. So like Brazilian time, the likes of that, and this, like, there's obviously through lines that.
Oh yeah, fully. Yeah. No, I was thinking about it. Like, I mean, part of this kind of process, or part of making a documentary, is actually finding the film. You know what I mean? So it's just a lot of time, sort of like processing and thinking about like how things work in relation to each other. And I was thinking, yeah, like if you were to describe the kind of artist or the kind of intelligence or whatever that informs the work that I do, it's more about this connective tissue. It's, you know what I mean? It's that's actually what interests me, really, is where the weird meeting points, where there's people in the room that maybe you would imagine shouldn't be in the room, or where there's traditions that have been overlooked or whatever. That's always been something that's been of interest. So yeah, it's interesting doing this, at this stage in my life. Like the last time I did this, I would have been in my 40s. Now I'm in my 50s. So yeah, so it's like it's been super informative and interesting to revisit that period or whatever.
Yeah, like for people that aren't aware of Brazilian time, would you maybe be able to explain what that is about, just to give context?
For sure. So basically, at the turn of the century, I'd had this idea for 3 or 4 years to, the notion was that, like, at that time, sampling, which was the kind of main way that the music I was into was getting made, was driven by drummers, and what I come to realize through talking with folks and thinking about things was that a lot of those drummers were still alive, living in LA, and some of them were even playing, but nobody out of our crowd was going to see them. Nobody even knew who they were. You know what I mean? We knew them as people whose names were on the back of records. We didn't know them as actual people, but they're still there. And there's this kind of notion of sort of generational separation that exists, I think, in popular culture, that I think is kind of unfortunate, and in many ways problematic. And I was interested in that. And so I thought, well, how cool would it be to bring some of these cats back into a room together and to have him talk about just recording those classic breaks that ended up being on hits for Snoop or Biz Markie or whoever. And so we did. But then first thing I realized was that none of these cats had any idea that their drums were being used. You know,
that's a whole other thing.
That's a whole other thing. Well, and then of course there's the problem that, you know, drums, you can't copyright a rhythm. You know what I'm saying? Which is kind of crazy. I mean, we have a very Eurocentric legal system around the way we think about music, you know, which is like melody, harmony, rhythm. And the top two you can actually copyright. The bottom one you can't. But anyways, so we put them in a room together. Then we realized they had no idea what was up. So I thought, like, let's just give them the 101, which is, let's show what beat juggling is about. You know, let's just show what this manually, before sampling, how it began, you know, where we would just take some of their classic breaks, beat juggle it. So it got J-Rock and Babu. I'm fortunate to be good friends with cats that are, you know, sort of some of the best DJs in the world. And anyway, we made it into this little short called Keeping Time. Basically what happened in the film was they saw this and they were like, well, you want me to play with them? And then it was like, well, sure. You know, I asked them to bring their drum kits. In the back of my mind, I was like, maybe there's something. Of course, we made a short film out of it. It ended up going to Sundance. It ended up going to South by Southwest. It was kind of a big deal. And then the Red Bull Music Academy invited us to show the film at the London Academy, which was in 2001, I believe. Showed the film, and then afterwards they said, look, the next one is going to be in Sao Paulo, Brazil. We'd love for you to come and redo it, bring the drummers. And of course we turned it into a show where we would show the film first and then they would come out and play together. Completely improvised, completely no script. You know what I mean? It's not like we're going to play the hits. It's more like a free jazz approach. And so then when I started to do the research on Brazil, I was like, this is crazy. Like, why would we just go to Brazil and just do the same thing? We should incorporate, you know, cats from Brazil. So then it ended up that we did that. It ended up this fucking monstrous chaos of 6 drummers and 6 DJs. And then I ended up making a feature-length film about it, which is really about the relationship between Brazilian music and North American, you know, Afro-Brazilian music, or music of the diaspora in Brazil, and the relationship to music of the diaspora in North America. And then all kinds of things. I mean, part of the process of making the film for me, as much as making this film about the Supremes, is building certain kinds of social bridges, or at least pointing towards certain kinds of social bridges. And, you know, one of probably the most famous thing that came out of the Brazil in Time thing was, there's like half the Mad Villainy record was made in the hotel room in Brazil, with Madlib just listening to Brazilian records and making beats, and we managed to film a little bit of it. It's one of the few pieces of footage of Otis actually making a beat in real time. And then, and that ended up, you know, really being one of the kind of most important hip-hop records of that period. We brought Dilla to Brazil, which was, you know, right before he passed, like about a year before he passed, we brought him to Brazil. That was another thing that happened. But a lot of things happen, and you can kind of measure by now that there is really a kind of it had a real impact. Like, there is now a much larger affinity and a much larger interest in Brazilian music in North America, even for hip-hop heads, but also, you know, all kinds of people are interested in the music. Even here, and I think Brazil in Time was a big part of that, you know.
Yeah, I mean,
well, I should say, like, after the film came out, we toured it, and just because we're here, and I need to say this out loud, we brought the tour to Europe, and we brought the tour to Limerick, bro, and we had 2 Brazilian drummers, and we had Tony Allen, and they played here with Madlib and J-Rock and DJ Nuts.
What year was this?
2006 or 7, somewhere in there.
Tony
Allen, Mamau from Azimuth, and Joao Paraíba, Madlib, J-Rock, and Nuts.
This is kind of like blowing my mind right now.
It was called the Trinity Rooms, which is where the Granary is here. And it was just like, and it was credit where credit is due. It was Murphy from Sugar Club brought the tour to Ireland. Dublin was a no-brainer, of course. Great show, amazing night. It's kind of a blur. I mean, you can imagine sea of pints and weed and whatnot. But we made it to Limerick, and yeah, I mean, it's kind of, when you think about it, it's like, I have a photo of Tony Allen and my mom at my house with my dad and my niece. This is crazy, My dad, who's this guy now? It's like, that's one of the most famous living drummers, But yeah, we got him to Limerick, so.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Some of them records that feature in the film go for stupid money now as well, whereas in the film, people are picking them up for
like
nothing.
$10. No, even for us, like, we go there, and it's everyone is doing their own kind of research. Everyone has kind of got their, like Cut and Egon have lists, and they're all sort of methodical, super nerd about it. Otis is just in sort of free form, listen to nothing, just buying things on vibe. We're all out there studying and figuring it out, writing down names and whatnot. But even when we went back the next time, half the records that we had bought previously, it was like, oh, they're looking for this. Bing! Price goes up,
There was a crazy thing I'd read. I think it was either you had said it or Madlib himself had said it, where it was like, people were looking for the specific records, whereas he wasn't really looking for specific stuff. He was like, it's not the record that makes it dope, it's me that makes it dope.
Yeah.
And like that actually, just as a concept, kind of was really illuminating to how he works. It's just part of his process. He is the driving force behind that.
It's completely, I mean, the famous story, or the story that I've told a few times, is that, so Eric and I went there first, obviously doing research. We were meeting the Brazilian musicians, doing interviews, that kind of stuff, working with nuts. And so Otis and Cut and them were arriving, we'll say, they were arriving like on the Thursday, and then their first gig. So Red Bull had them playing out as well, doing like gigs just in Sao Paulo. And Otis's first gig was the Tuesday night in the kind of, blisteringly popular, nutty Sao Paulo club called Muji. It was like 500 super enthusiastic Brazilian kids go there every Tuesday, and it's hip-hop, wall-to-wall hip-hop, underground vibes. So we go to pick up Cut. Grand, here comes Cut, 2 bags of records. Grand, here comes Otis. Dude, where's your records? Oh, I didn't bring records. But you're DJing on Tuesday. Yeah. So what are you going to play? Oh, I'll buy records. I was like, you're going to buy records? You've never been here before, bro. How do you know you're going to buy records? Dude, that fool, like, you have no idea. Like, he went digging. By the end of the weekend, he had 2 crates, and he had figured out, like,
how to play them. Yeah.
And, it was so hype about him. It was funny, like, because, he was really, really popular there. People really knew about him, I mean, they knew about everybody, but Otis is kind of a legendary figure, and people knew about him. So, he, all these people are super hyped. They announce him, and then the first song he plays is a Gal Costa song, and just to see these, I remember there was a few women towards the front that I just literally saw people melt. People were just like, he's
something about him
our
playing
music. Yeah.
Okay.
People were not ready for that shit.
Yeah.
And there was something really beautiful about that, man. And there is something really. There was something about that project. I felt like that, and I feel, especially as somebody from here, you know what I mean? Like, there is something about somebody that you admire from somewhere else coming here and finding something that we don't take that seriously, whether it's our music, whether it's our literature, whether it's our arts, whatever it is, and holding up the mirror and being like, yo, this shit is incredible. It reaches you in a different way. And we had the opportunity to do that in Brazil. And it was, like all these kids that are super amped on underground hip hop from the US, and then the sort of superstar of underground hip hop comes and plays Brazilian music for them. Was just like, there was something really special about that. It was like a really, it felt like an important, like a proper moment, so.
Yeah. Brazilian culture is incredible. I went to Brazil like 2018, and I remember like, I can't remember the name of the dance, but I remember I went to like street parties, and there'd be DJs spinning vinyl, and no matter what the song was, people had learned, you know, the core principles of these dances, and one person would get up, start dancing, then another one, and there's little crowds of people in sync doing the same dance. To no matter what, like Kate Renata could have came on, it could have been anything, and they were all doing it, and just like really give my brain a reset going there and listening to music there and dancing there and stuff.
Well, they say that the average European or North American has about between 30 and 40 songs that they know by heart in their brain, and that the average Brazilian is more like 150. You know, so it's like, but this is something that goes back to, you know, like from my research and, you know, dealing with older musicians and that, you know, when Cannonball Adderley brought George Duke and all them to Brazil in the 60s, and when they came back, it was like a reset for them. And so knowing this and knowing the possibilities, then having the opportunity to go there. But look, we're in a very special situation here in this country right now, man. Like we really, you know, we have a extraordinary amount of Brazilians here, and it's, you know, let's see what happens, man. But it's like, it's a very exciting moment in that respect. You know what I mean? It's like, it's something to be embraced. There is an interface between us and Brazilian folks. It does work somehow. So yeah, let's see what happens.
That was something that I was actually going to ask you. You know, like a lot of your work does focus on these relationships and stuff. Like, what are some of the relationships you've noticed between even America and Ireland, or some of the other countries maybe that you visited that
here?
Yeah.
That's a big question.
Even if we can maybe zoom it down into music culture.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, obviously, you know, like there's understanding. I mean, I would say most of the stuff that I'm interested in is folks that are coming from a kind of, you know, colonial or post-colonial kind of thing, and those are the through threads for me. That so you have the most stupidest things from like, if I want to find digestive biscuits in America, why do I know if I go to a Chinese store, they'll have them, or an Indian store? Do you know what I mean? Like, whereas, you know, so you have these sort of threads around British colonialism that kind of, you know, the imperial links that exist in the, you know, that obviously from the perspective of, you know, finding out that Indian people talk, or Pakistani people talk about the border that exists, or the creation of the border that exists between India and Pakistan as partition, really mess with my head. Like, I was like, what? Or going to Cairo and seeing the same lions over the fucking Nile that are in Trafalgar Square, like the exact same ones.
Yeah.
Was like, you know, and for me, it's kind of, you know, like what's the lesson of that shit? The lesson of that shit is that, like, little small, I call them small gestures of solidarity, you know what I mean? But little small gestures of solidarity often, well, like obviously the support for Palestine that's being shown in this country at the moment or whatever, actually really make a lot of difference. There's actually really important kind of counter narratives that are being offered that are really important in moments like this, you know? And so, yeah, I would say, like, you know, whether it's in Shannos, whether it's in, you know, like, there's all kinds of ways. Kate Rock, you know, African-American woman from Florida who was training as a ballet dancer, who, while she was waiting to go on in a ballet competition, sees Irish dancing, age 7, tells her parents, I don't want to do ballet, I want to do that. And then becomes this, you know, to the point like where, yeah, like we did a show in Orlando where she's from, a photo exhibit, and we invite her to dance at the opening. You know, I mean, she's in the Supremes film as well. That's how I become friends with her. But I invite her to dance at the opening, and then somebody films it. It goes online. It goes viral. Beyonce's mom retweets it. Lil Sims retweets it. And then it becomes this kind of hailstorm of shit of all these people that aren't even Irish telling her that she can't dance.
This was just before lockdown, was it?
No, this was just now. This year. Yeah.
This year?
Yeah, this year. And, you know, it turns into this whole crazy, crazy thing. But then it means for the first time the proper, you know, Irish dance community finally accept the notion that, like, yo, there are these people that don't fit within the, you know what I mean, what we would consider what you're supposed to look like, quote unquote. And then suddenly people make a big effort to embrace her, and then she ends up on the cover of all these dance magazines. She ends up on News Talk, on RT, and you're just like, it's that stuff that's really interesting shit. That's proper culture shit for me.
Yeah. And I guess when we were talking about relationships and stuff there, like I guess that there's like a very obvious through line between the Supremes coming to Ireland and seeing the hunger strikers and seeing, like the impact of colonialism on Ireland and what black people in America have experienced as well.
For sure. Which is part of what, the finding out that Kamau Kenyatta had kept a photo diary of that tour was kind of like the impetus to make me think about it. But then finding out that the Supremes came together and were raised for the most part in a projects in Detroit, which colloquially is known as the Douglas Houses, and that where the Supremes played when they played in Limerick was literally opposite where Frederick Douglass had actually stayed when he was in Limerick. That was kind of, maybe there's a film here, you know what I mean? So, but yeah, that's the stuff that, I mean, for me, that's kind of, the detail in the corner of the photo. When people remember this period, will they remember Taylor Swift or will they remember, you know what I'm saying?
But I think
Kate Rock. I
think like at the core of a lot of what you're doing is like documenting history and like exposing things that otherwise would go under the radar, and like
for sure,
it's those little connections you're talking about, and like the ripple effect of, say, that dancer, it has an impact on culture because it's something that needs to be seen and heard, and when it is, it resonates with people. Yeah,
I mean, for me, that's the job of the artist, man. In fairness, like that's the way I was trained. The people I aspired to when I was younger, when I was at school or whatever, like those were the kind of the people doing that kind of work. Were the people that I was interested in, the people kind of pointing to those kinds of things. Because very often, that's not the story that we're being told. You know what I mean?
Because I think, especially more than ever, the hook of like a story, or the like very like, this person did X, Y, Z, becomes the story, and that's it. And it's like the something that's very like invigorating or like exciting to see, but there's a lot going on underneath, and it's and I think in an era of like TikTok and stuff like that, it's easy to just have like a headline, and there's whole parts of the story that just go missing.
Yeah. Although, I mean, we can run contrary to it too. I mean, it seems to me that, part of what is empowering to some, for better or worse, because there's a lot of fiction out there too, masquerading as real stuff, but there is room somewhere in TikTok. There is room for those, you know what I mean?
I actually like all the videos I'm putting up are like, I did one on like Hair Squid recently and talked about like their impact and their influence, because they are sort of forgotten about, and they actually had like a massive impact on like encouraging a lot of artists.
I'm not really on TikTok. And about a month ago, I'm just wake up one day and my Insta is like, fuck, how the fuck am I getting like 100 new followers, all Irish? What the fuck is going on? I'm scratching my head, and it's you posting that fucking thing.
Oh yeah.
It's just like, eventually I was like, somebody sent me the link to your thing.
Okay.
And I was just like, oh fuck, dude. I'm not on there, but that's what I'm saying. Like, it's literally that. No, it's important.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not important for the followers, but it's important for the notion that like that information is there.
Yep.
A lot of people, people need to be reminded.
Yep.
And there's new generations coming through all the time.
Well, that's it. Like my brother, massive music head. I explain like the stuff I'm into, and it's just getting older, and like then you're introducing like your younger brother into stuff, but like, and he's like, no way, there's someone from Ireland doing this, blah blah blah. And even like what you're doing about the Supremes, like I'd never heard about that tour, and like that's just so important. And like Madlib coming to Limerick with fucking Tony Allen, like that's crazy shit. Shit.
Yeah, that was a fun time.
But you're talking about this sort of journalistic instinct that you have, and was that always with you when you moved to America from Limerick? Did you have that in you before you were?
Yeah, but weirdly enough, like when I was living here, I mean, I'm from very close to here, like incredibly close to here. Like I remember coming in here to the market, like when I was a kid or whatever. So, And in those days, you know, you would always have, you know, it didn't matter if you didn't have a job, if you barely had clothes to wear, you had nothing to eat. If you had a story, you know, this type of people that have a story that could tell you, no, he's a great fella. No, he'd tell you, he really explained, you know, about, you know, what, you know, who they were. Or, you know, it's the thing like where people say like, cross. No, you would cross before the railway bridge or after the railway bridge. And then they totally have it plugged in. Oh, so you're Brendan's nephew. I am. Brendan's great GA, man. And then he'd just start, and then you're a grandfather, and then you're this and you're this. So I always have like a kind of cultural cachet associated, especially working class people, like, you know, those kinds of people who can tell you who you are, who your family is, what happened there, who did what to who, where the injustice was, you know, the Tans got him, or he did this with that, or, you know, even look at Blind Boy, dude. Like, I mean, the Blind Boy really is like a product of the same thing, you know, the notion of this sort of intergenerational trauma of like, yeah, my grandfather was killed by the Black and Tans or whatever it is, and somebody to actually really go down, afford yourself the privilege of actually going down the rabbit hole and try to figure it out. There's something really important about that, especially here for whatever reason, you know. I can't really speak about what it was like for people in Sligo, but I can't imagine it's that different, you know. Yeah. But in this particular place we're in right now, it's very important. And so I had that. Of course, it's not like somebody stamped me on the back of my head and I was just like, okay, so that's what I need to do. I thought I'm going to be a photographer. I was a landscape photographer when I was here. Because for me, it was kind of, and I mean, the Supremes to some degree has a lot of the same ideas, but to what extent, for example, can you go out the canal bank here and make photos that speak to some of the things that have happened on the canal bank? You know, the canal bank here, you don't know anything about the canal bank, but the canal bank here during colonial times was like a kind of a no-go area. Okay. Because it was too easy to ambush people. There was too many ways to get away, whether it was on the water, whether it was over bridges or whatever. So it was a no-go area. So it was this kind of autonomous, weird space that existed. So when I was at NCAD in the 80s, I was trying to think about ways that you could make photographs of that would somehow, without words, would somehow allow you to feel that. And in some weird way, here I am fucking 40 years later making a film about the Supremes, and it's kind of not that different, dude. And it's kind of not that different what I've been doing this whole time, you know? Like, it's not that often I have the opportunity to sit down with Madlib, but I have sat down with Madlib and talked about this kind of stuff. It's not that often I would have the opportunity to talk to Damian Marley, but I have talked to Damian Marley about this stuff. It's kind of, he says, you know, B+, you don't do music videos, you do songumentaries. That's what he But it's just because I'm always like, nah, there's got to be something going on underneath. We can't just be standing on a beach. It has to be a beach, a particular beach. That's something particular, you know.
It's ghost notes, like the stuff that's unheard.
Notes. Yeah. And so, yeah. I mean, weirdly enough, like you couldn't really, I mean, there's no way for me to make a map 40 years ago, go like, oh yeah, like all this local knowledge and interest and stuff like that is going to turn into a career as a music photographer or something, you know, but that, it really did. You know, if you allow it to inform what you do, eventually people will see that. Some people saw it earlier. I remember Rocca from Dilated Peoples in the mid-90s said something, for somebody was doing a story about me and he said something and it really rocked me. I was like, wow, he can really see. I remember Flying Lotus saying something to me. You only photograph people that you actually can subscribe to. You only photograph people. So if you choose to make this record with me, I'm saying I see you and I'm taking it as a big compliment. And I was like, fucking man, you know what I mean? You're Flying Lotus, bro. Like, of course I'm going to make your record, you know, or going to make the photos for your record cover. But it meant a lot. And it means a lot when I'm of that generation too. Like it's different. Like I'm not, you know, I don't usually, you know what I mean? I'm not really to talk about myself like this, but it's better for me to somebody to see you than for me to have to explain to you exactly what it is or what I'm trying to do. So it makes a bigger impact to me if like somebody like that actually sees it without me, you know, having to explain it to them, like what I'm doing. And that's the way it's been with I still make good photos no matter what. But if I can get to that place where we have a little bit of sand in the Vaseline of mainstream culture, that's what's up.
Because like I sort of, something I'm curious about is like how when you moved to America that connection happened, because you know hip hop was very early days and you're coming from Ireland. Where's that connection where people can understand that you really understand the culture or really appreciate the culture, and you know?
Well, it was never like some compartmentalized version. You know what I mean? I never shut off my Irishness. I never shut off my politics. I never shut off my history. It was just always fully me. I always understood hip hop as that.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like hip hop is something you do when you have the right amount of marijuana in your system, or you're wearing the right clothes, or you have drank enough beer, or you've fucking whatever. I did enough Molly or whatever. You know what I mean? Like it's not that. Like it's something you live. And for me, you know, the kind of radical moments were like going to the States for the first time and realizing that, yeah, this wasn't just something I was listening to, but this was something that explained the actual lived experience of being in my case, the Mission District in San Francisco, like an inner city kind of rough and tumble, wild kind of part of San Francisco at the end of the 80s, better than the kinds of things at that time that people of my age were, you know, whether it was the films of Martin Scorsese or David Lynch, whether it was the artwork of, you know, Basquiat or Robert Longo or Cindy Sherman or whatever it was that I was studying, the music, the culture of hip-hop, whether it was BDP, whether it was Public Enemy, whether it was Ice Cube and NWA, explained the reality of living in somewhere like the Mission District better than any of the other stuff. And so I immediately was like, well, clearly this isn't just music. I mean, this is something as important as this stuff that I'm going to college to study. So I have to bring all of myself to that. And I think people recognize that. You know what I mean? If you're serious, people will see your seriousness. Obviously, there's going to be people that you're not going to be able to, that won't want to see that, or that won't want to be reminded of that. But then my attitude was always like, well, if we're not meant to work together, then that's okay too. You know what I mean? Like I don't, you know, and I was never the type of person like, if I can only photograph A Tribe Called Quest, then I've really, you know, I was never that. I was just like, this is what I do. I'm just going to treat it seriously. I'm going to do it as best as I can. There is a need for people like me that are taking it seriously, and they'll figure it out eventually. And then I was lucky then after that, then kind of made my luck a bit. You know what I mean? Like, so, but that was it. And I was always, I mean, I remember I used to move furniture, and I remember one time I was moving furniture in San Francisco, and we went to this guy's house, and the fella that I was working with said, man, I recognize this guy. This guy's an old Panther. So, you know, I was like, wow, that's crazy, right? We're moving a guy who was an old Black Panther. And I remember picking up a box of books, and on the top of the box it had Frantz Fanon, The Wretched of the Earth. And that was literally like Luke Gibbons, who was one of my professors at NCAD, had just given me that book, Leaving Ireland. And I was just like, I mean, it's as naive as this fucking sounds. I said, oh shit, y'all have this here too? But, you know, it's one of those things where you're just like, dude, like, you know, the connective tissue is real. And, you know, and then you find out about, like, you know, Bernadette Devlin, coming and doing, you know, like those kinds of gestures. But, like, it's all, you know, it's there. You just have to pay attention, and it reveals itself to you. And that's meeting Chuck D, but that's also meeting the thousands of people I've met over the years that have told me stories, or, you know what I mean, like shared an experience with me or whatever, and you're, you know, and me with them, you know, and it becomes part of it's like a language that you operate out of then after that, you know. So
yeah, like was there any artists straight away that you worked with before they had made their name, really, that you could tell that there was something special with them?
Loads. I mean, I would say, like, to be honest with you, like, part of the deal with me as well is I have a fairly decent set of ears. So, you know, like, from very early on, you know, Freestyle Fellowship, really, House of Pain.
Yeah.
I knew House of Pain before Jump Around came out. I mean, I knew him a good year before Jump Around came out. And you can, you know, you're just like, you know, I remember Fellowship, even to the point, like, where it sounded so strange to me what they were doing that at first I thought it was kind of whack. I was like, I don't really understand what's happening here. Like, this dude is not hitting the fucking, you know, he's not hitting the pocket the way I'm familiar with. Is this good? And then realizing, like, not only is this good, but they're literally breaking something here in a really important way. And then I become friends. Then, you know, there's this kind of, you know, it's kind of obsessive compulsive aspect to it too, where you're just like, no, you know, you become uber fan.
Yes.
And then you're just like, I'm going to photograph these dudes. I don't care about the money. I'm just going to make photos. And then it turns out that that's some of the most important work you end up making, you know.
I think there's something about, like, when you have that mad interest in something and you want to showcase the way you see it or you hear it to other people, and that's what creates, like, the best work often, you know. And sometimes when I'm a journalist and throughout my time, sometimes I'll wonder, like, is this too niche? Are people going to be like too, or like, is there going to be too few people that are into this certain thing? When actually that's the kind of the job, isn't it? To, like,
it's the job.
Yeah.
And I mean, the thing is, if you can really feel it and you trust yourself, it kind of doesn't matter. Because even if it's super niche, it's the kind of thing, like, 10 years later, it's suddenly become a thing. It's like, oh man, that era of, because, you know, when all that was happening in the early 90s, for example, Freestyle Fellowship, it was kind of like a weird wish fulfillment of what hip hop should be. But then it took a good 10 years. You know, it's really the kind of underground rap period of what we would call fat beats rap, you know, where it was like everybody was making a 12-inch, but like the era of the beginnings of Yasin and Black Star and Company Flow and all those cats. And all those cats look back to what the Fellowship and them were doing. Yeah. And the Project Blowed, early Project Blowed and Good Life stuff. Or, flip it another way, Ava DuVernay, one of the most important filmmakers in the U.S. today, she came out of that too. And so her first film, 10 years later, is about that period. I mean, I'm in it. It's a great film called This Is the Life. And it's like, it sounded like we were doing something in a bubble and no one paid attention. It's just, we didn't have a huge marketing machine behind us. There were some people who were championing it. Yeah. And then eventually marketing goes away. And then eventually people remember. And of that period, like when Hip Hop Evolution, that kind of Peabody Award-winning, really good series on, I think it's on Netflix or whatever, gets made. Yeah. Fellowship damn nearly gets their own episode. Yeah. And you're just like, oh, how the hell did that happen? But history looks at things differently. So like you're championing some shit, it feels like completely niche. It's just you and 4 other homies that are into it. If it's really what you think it is, don't worry.
It'll be remembered that way.
Yeah, it'll be remembered. I mean, it's, you know, I mean, that in the end, quality wins. You know, I mean, you know, it's all good, like, whatever. Like, yeah, it's nice to sell lots of records and get lots of hits and, you know, whatever. But in the end, you know, people doing quality shit, you know, there will always be a place for quality shit.
Yeah. You know? I think the one that kind of stands out of your work of something that feels insignificant at the time, but like is literally the embodiment of the whole thing is the DJ Shadow cover. Like I actually seen him in Belfast, like must have been an anniversary show or something like 3 or 4 weeks ago. But yeah, like surely like at the time,
I was doing 2 records at the time. I was doing the same week I shot the first Razkaz record, which is still a great record, and I shot the Shadow thing in Sacramento, and it was for sure. I was like, you know, this Razkaz thing is the thing that's about to make me the hip hop photographer to go to. Didn't happen. And this Shadow thing, it'll be cool, but whatever. And then, of course, it's like, well, that ends up being the most important thing you do. It's not the most important. I don't know if it's the most important, but it's like one of the most important things you've ever done. That just the gift that keeps on giving. And I'll tell you a funny story. About a year or two after that came out, and I had made the video and everything where we recreated the cover, but I was very, very broke. Very broke. And a good friend of mine, Jessica Clark, who at the time was managing Cypress Hill, invited me to go to dinner. She was like, "Oh, I'm meeting a bunch of my girls, and come on, dude, you look like you could do with a meal." And I could do with a meal. I was like, okay, I'll be there. So we went out, and then, you know, one of her friends was working at Interscope at the time, and I don't remember the group, but she was complaining. And it was like, "What's the problem?" And she's like, "Oh, I've had such a shit week. I got this group, and all they want is somebody to give them the look of the DJ Shadow album cover. So we've flown this fucking photographer out from England, and she's a real pain in the fucking ass. And I'm just having the worst week." And I'm just sitting there going like, and I'm bursting for work. I mean, oh man, you don't even know. I'm so stuck. Well, what I realized is that, you know, that's my fault. That's not her fault for being too stupid to figure out that she's sitting at a table opposite the person who actually did the DJ Shadow record. It's my fault for not letting her know, for not letting people like her know that I'm the person who did that shit. So that was a kind of a proper lesson. But it just shows you, like, even 2 years later, when the record was already gold, it was already kind of a cultural shift, MTV reached out. That was weird. It was weird in the sense that I realized the limits of who I was and what I could do. You know, music video is a very specific thing, and that the possibility. It's kind of what led to Keeping Time, to be honest.
Really?
Yeah, because when we made the video for Midnight in a Perfect World, I put Earl Palmer into the music video because Earl had played on all those Axelrod records, and the Axelrod records was kind of, in terms of vibe and in terms of what was informing what Josh was doing at that time, to me, it was like really important. And fucking there he was. He was in Burbank. I just was like, well, let's put him in the video. And he was fucking delighted. And that's when I was like, you know, these old drummers, there's a story here. Like, I need to find a way to, it took a while, but, you know, I need to find a way to tell the story. But what was interesting about that moment is that, you know, like, we're doing something really important. It's fucking obvious. I'm working with Spike Jonze's editor, which was crazy. And he's dead since, Erickson Brennan, great guy. Really helped me figure this shit out. And no, but, you know, I'm dirt poor. You know what I mean? And I'm not convinced yet that this is, we've really done something important. And that's 2 years later, you know what I mean? So it's really the kind of breakthrough period when I had an agent and I really start to work and start to make money wasn't really until 98, 99.
Really?
And I'd already been doing it damn nearly, 8 or 9 years at that point, and done important stuff. Like,
yeah.
In retrospect,
It's interesting. Like, I guess at what point did a lot of the hip hop stuff become valued? If you know what I mean? Because I imagine there was maybe,
to be honest,
when you were at university, were people and you were wanting to photograph this stuff? Were people
hating? Yes.
Were they actually?
Yeah. No, I mean, the same kinds of critical thinking about hip hop that still existed then. I mean, a lot of people thought it was of no value, it was misogynistic or low-key racist or, like whatever. And people were very upset. There was a lot of people hating when I was at grad school at the notion. There's people still hating now that I'm teaching at universities. I still get the same shit. But, yeah, I mean, I honestly, I don't think Contact High was really a kind of benchmark, really, in terms of understanding the value of that work. And that's only really in the last, that kicked off just before COVID. So that's like 2017. And that was it was a book. It became a best-selling book. It's a pictorial history of hip-hop. And it's this woman that worked at Mass Appeal, Vicky Toback, had this idea that, as opposed to just the single frame, that the contact sheet, so you could see the other 11 images if you're shooting medium format, or the other 34 or 35 images if you're shooting 35, it was interesting to see contextually, to see what the performance was like, to see what else was happening. And so the first time she interviewed me, it was for the ODB cover, you know, the kind of satirical Janet, fake Janet, where it's ODB holding the boobs. And she wanted to see the other frames. And it was kind of like, okay, I actually see the value. Then she pitched it as a book, became a book, then it became an exhibit. Then the exhibit goes crazy. And then Sotheby's then decide to do their first hip-hop auction. And then that's where the Biggie crown photo sells for
okay,
400K or something. And then suddenly, like, everybody's like, oh, word? So subsequently, like, I've had work in the Sotheby's exhibit. But I would say that for me, that was the first time, I think, in terms of actually the real monetization of it or whatever. That's the first time I come to become aware, like, wow, this actually really is something now that well, because it, you know, I mean, nobody else has those images, you know what I mean? Like, it's kind of, you know, it's kind of crazy. But prior to that, really, it was difficult to understand. What was kind of another breakthrough moment for me was there was a few periods in the 2008 to 2010 or 11, there was a few moments where I had the opportunity to be in conversation with some of the previous generation of hip-hop photographers. You know, the Jamel Shabazz, the Joe Conzo, the Jeanette Beckmans, the Martha Cooper, you know, Henry Chalfant. I'm trying to remember all the...
And where was this at?
It was once it was in Korea, a couple times in New York. And then even when Vicky started to do Contact High, there was, you know, it was kind of an extension of that. It was more of an opportunity to be in conversation with them. And then that was also very instructive, like to realize that Jamel was finally being coveted in the way that he was, you know. I mean, I'm certainly part of it, but I'm kind of, you know, I have my own story. I'm not, you know, we all do, you know, but so sometimes I feel like I'm part of it, but I have this kind of, I always feeling like I'm an outsider, you know what I mean? But I am part of that tradition, which would bring you right up to the kind of, you know, I'd be part of the generation with Danny Hastings and Jonathan Mannion, myself, Eric Johnson, Mike Miller, Estevan Oriol, of course.
Who's the co-founder of the theater? Was it the theater that passed away that was a photographer recently? I might be mixing it up.
Co-founder of The Source, Chimo Du.
Oh, okay.
Chimo Du, yeah.
Yeah.
We were kind of competitors. I was the guy at Rap Pages, he was the guy at The Source. And we were like the kind of upstart Larry Flint kind of company, and they were like the Yale guys or Harvard guys that set up the Hip Hop magazine that got all the funding. And so we were, in that era, we weren't super tight. But then after that all kind of passed, and we, you know, I remember once he had put out a book independently and I ordered it, and he sent me a very sweet note in the, you know, written into the cover of the book, and then we kind of become friends, you know, like on Facebook probably at that time, but so, you know, then you start to see, like, actually you're part of a trajectory, part of a tradition, you know. But within the tradition, then there's, you know, everybody brings their own thing to the table. So, you know, we see each other from time to time, but it does help you understand the value of it. It does help you understand, like, this is part of something bigger than you, you know, which obviously it is. But sometimes you need somebody else to point that out to you. You know what I mean? It's not like I'm out here going, yes, I'm the hip hop.
Yeah.
You know, wake up, look in the mirror, and go, like, you know, I'm part of this very important. Like, no, I'm just trying to get to make photos of Long Kesh. You know what I mean? Whatever, you know? It's like wandering around the Maze Football Club, expecting to get busted by the PSNRI or whatever. Like, but that's my day to day. Don't be.
So something I'm really interested in as well is, like, your relationship with what's going on in Ireland. Like, do you still say pretty tapped into music going on here?
I try. I mean, I would say this, like, it's easier to keep tapped into current events, news, that kind of shit, than it is to stay tapped into music.
You have to dig quite a bit, I think. With
You have to dig.
what's going on in Ireland.
You know, like it's not like you just get hot press or something.
No, like, and the stuff that gets played on radio for the most part is shit, and like that's getting exposed. Like you actually do like have to dig to find
or
stuff.
someone have to show you. You know what I mean? You know, and so I have my informants. You know what I mean? Like I have my people that put me up on shit. But I'm always, you know, just for the record, you know, hit the fucking DMs, bro. If you have music, I'm always happy to fucking check some shit out. Honestly, a lot of shit. There's a lot of shit, but there's a lot of shit everywhere. And even in the era that we think of as the golden era, trust me, you know, like that's what I'm saying. People remember the golden era and it's like, oh man, I can't believe you were taking photos in the era of Brand Nubian and Pete Rock, Dilla, Tribe Called Quest. Yeah, but that was also the era of MC Hammer, Vanilla Ice. You know what I'm saying? And
people don't remember that. People don't remember the bad stuff.
Yeah, we've, but bad stuff often is popular, you know?
Yeah.
So, you know, and I no disrespect to Hammer and all them dudes, whatever, it's fine. But I'm saying like you imagine, you know, that it's like, oh, that was the golden era. And it was like, you know, yeah, it's true. There was great music coming out every week. And it doesn't feel like that's happening now. I feel like the best and brightest working class folks, especially, aren't necessarily heading to music in the way they were.
Can't afford to.
Can't afford to.
It's crazy.
That which is important.
Yeah.
It's an important part of it. I mean, you know, the great kind of beat era of music in LA, you know, people say, you know, how did that happen or how was that happening? A lot of it was because people didn't really want to live in LA and it was cheap to have a fucking back shed where you could fucking set up some rank speakers and fucking a beat machine and just fucking go out there and, you know what I mean? And now it's not so easy. Space is a premium.
No.
Rent is high.
Yeah.
People are caught up with trying to survive.
Yeah. One artist from Donegal, it's like super interesting. I don't know if you've heard of him. Signs Crushes Motorist.
No.
Like
you ain't sending me music, bro. Like what's up?
I know. I need to start sending you all this stuff. Like, but I'm one of these people who I'm like, it's again niche interest, and I'm like, I'm afraid that I'll just be like talking at people like, oh, you need to check out this like rapper that's making like weird abstract stuff in Offaly, or like, you know, and people are just gonna be like, what do you have? Like, this is my, I don't know. Like me and my mum, like I think it's like a neurodivergent thing where it's like her thing is healthcare. She works in the NHS and she's obsessed with talking about it. She'll talk at me for 20 minutes, then it'll be my turn to talk at her for 20 minutes about like hip hop or something. Kind of listening, not really listening, but I'm always afraid of doing that with other people.
Oh no. Good.
But Science Crushes Motorist, kid from Donegal, I think he's studying in Belfast. He has about, I'm going to say like 14 different aliases, 13 different aliases on Spotify. And just for context of how popular he is, like I think the lowest monthly listeners is like 200k, the most is like millions. And on TikTok, he's like one of the biggest like artists sort of soundtrack and stuff. It's kind of like duster type music, very emotional, like they call it slowcore, but he has just like all these variations of it. He doesn't even have TikTok though. Like he's doing this in a vacuum, you know, but it's just going on TikTok. But he's got a new album coming out and it's being co-produced by Casey Pluto, who works with like Travis Scott and like all these artists. And I think he's just like chilling in Belfast. I think he's on tour in America now, but I think that it's like that's the new way that artists are doing something mad just online, you know, from their bedroom. Like I think we went to a show in Belfast and there was numerous A&Rs at the show to go and see, and they were all like coming in to talk to him and be like, oh, we'd love to sign you. He has absolutely no interest in it. Like he's just making the music. It's probably because he's like making good money, but like he has no interest in joining like a label, or what can they do for a kid like that? For him? Yeah. But that's
exciting.
Really exciting, and that kind of gives me hope that, you know, he can do it on his own. He's doing it on his own terms. Whereas, but like as you said, I think it's very difficult. Like artist space is really expensive to do anything. Like we got lucky with this space in Belfast; it's really cheap. But I was looking for ages to try and find something. Yeah. It's not accessible to have a space outside of your house to do stuff anymore.
Well, there's the virtual space, the free virtual space. But then, it's a challenging path, obviously. But if you have that kind of multiple aliases, lots of, you know, that's like Knowledge or Madlib or those type of dudes that are like, just like, but that's great. There's somebody doing that here, you know.
And I think that when you're talking about history and how like it often takes time for people to just realize the importance of a lot of these things, or to like reach past a threshold where wider culture kind of understands it. Like, it's happening quicker for some people though, just because of the internet, I think, as well. Where like someone like Knowledge, I think in the past it might have taken like 30, 40 years because he wouldn't have had the internet to distribute his music and stuff like that. Whereas I can feel a real change in the last few years of how people talk about him as an artist and how important he is musically. Like the kind of the spider web of his influence is crazy.
It's crazy. Here in Alchemist, I don't know if you saw that interview with Alchemist where he talked about, the final piece of the jigsaw puzzle was seeing Knowledge and then sitting down with Knowledge and actually breaking bread and being like, okay, so this is what I did, and then I did this, and then you do this, and then this helps you to monetize for that, and then boom. And I just seeing Al saying that shit was like, yeah, it was really inspiring. I mean, in fairness, dude, that's really, that's also another part of it. Like, you must stay connected. You must be willing to change. Change is everything. Change is the only thing that actually is constant, and not being afraid of it. And trust yourself, you know what I mean? Like, that's the...
I think Al is like a good example of someone that's really evolved over the years, because I would say there's a hell of a lot of people who wouldn't have known his work in the past that are only seeing his stuff with like, Bronson or Earl and all these people. And like, I think that evolution is really, really amazing.
I mean, what's interesting to me about the way that he's done it is that he's built this sort of front-facing empire of just constant releases, like his own label, his own, team, all that stuff. But then internally, he has a space that's not that different than this. Mm-hmm. But he has an open door policy. So it's kind of like, whoever's cool, you want to get at them, just go there. Yeah. You know what I mean? And you've seen who ends up there. Really important people. Not just the people we know, but like, cats I know that I love, that I'm super happy he's in LA now, is people like Budgie, for example. And yeah, that's just him showing up at Al's and then just them getting along, and then I'm just, him finding a part of it that works for him or whatever. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, that's culture, dude. That's what's up. I mean, I don't know if you've seen that Stacks. Very good, actually. Totally should watch it. It's on, I don't know what it'll be on here, but it's on HBO over. But it's a sort of 5 or 6 part Stacks documentary, just about like a kind of pretty detailed history of Stacks. And in the end, that's all it was just, they had the space. They were trying to record country music. It wasn't working. There's all these kids hanging out next door at the record shop. They were like, let's just throw the doors open and see what the kids from the record shop can do. And then the kids from the record shop ended up being like Isaac Hayes, David Porter, eventually Otis Redding. You know what I mean? It's just like, crazy. What? But that's not that different than Brain Feeder or, any other story you think of, Stone's Throw or whatever. Like
the Dungeon Family, I think it's just so important, and it's becoming harder to do that kind of thing. And I think there's like, at worst, there's like an individualist culture going on that kind of doesn't breed that kind of community and stuff. But I think there's other factors. It's just expensive to do that kind of thing. It's more difficult. But what do you think are some of the cultures or communities that you've witnessed that have been most interesting when it comes to creating music?
I mean, on a micro level or on a
micro? Yeah, zooming
level.
In something like
the
Dungeon
obviously
Family.
The Good Life was the first one. But the Good Life was operating under the shadow of, what they call the Black Arts movement, which was, all those dudes had become elders, but like people like Horace Tapscott, Billy Higgins, Kamau Daoud, Ben Caldwell, and they recognized what was happening and helped nurture it. So then you have the Good Life folks, which becomes the Project Blowed folks, which kind of becomes the sketchbook stroke low end theory folks, which becomes the Brain Feeder folks, which becomes the switch back. Then is when all the jazz kids find a home in the beat electronic kids record label. So so Kamasi and Thundercat find a home at Brandon Coleman at Brain Feeder, which then nurtures which nurtures this whole. I mean, that's kind of. I mean, what's happening right now? There's a small record label called Minaret. Good friend of mine running it, Egyptian kid, really, really, really smart, really young, full of energy. And so that's like the kind of Lewis Cole, Genevieve Artadi, you know, Justin Brown, like all them cats. That's their version of this, you know, that's happening in the world. And it's, you know, if you pay attention, it kind of goes in it's kind of 5-year cycles, and you know, and people build their thing, and a certain amount of it goes through and becomes more mainstream. I mean, I don't know to what degree people would consider Lewis Cole mainstream. It's Grammy nominated.
Yeah,
you know,
hidden in plain sight kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's working.
Yeah.
But I don't know, it's not Thundercat, you know what I mean? It's something different, but they're, you know, that's all happening. And then you see that kind of, you know, it's interesting to me, like, LA is very generative. For whatever reason, and I don't know whether this is a kind of larger 20-year cycle thing or something, but it felt like at one time, LA always looked to New York, you know, say from the 70s to the 90s, you know, it was all, the measure was like, you know, the Far Side are only good because New York fools really like that shit.
Okay.
Whereas now I feel like it's not nearly the other way around. You know what I mean? It's like New York cats got to come out and show us what they about before they get considered to be good. You know what I mean? But it's always this kind of, there's always this kind of weird, you know, Oakland at one time was very, very important. You know, the Bay Area in general seems to have waned a little bit, but that's just because I'm not there, and there probably is really interesting shit. You know, like I didn't know anything about Hi-Fi, for example.
Yeah.
You know, Limerick, you know what I'm saying? Like there was a real hype around here, around this particular room, even like the stuff being made in this particular room at one point in time, which seems to have subsided. Does that mean that the creativity is stopped? No, it just means, you know, we need to feed ourselves with new kinds of, there's something new happening here, there's something new happening here.
But also I think that can also come down to documentation, because the same stuff might be going on, but because it's just not being exposed to everybody, everybody's like, oh, it's died down there, when really people are still making music.
People are still making music.
And that's kind of why I wanted to restart the podcast, because I felt like, just a lot of stuff that goes unseen kind of. And I think it's important to just like talk about things, because it creates this sense of community and discourse about stuff, like talking about artists, producers, these kind of things, and connects the dots and results in like collaborations sometimes, you know. It's like, is there anything that you've ever like spoken into existence almost, or like works that have happened when you've brought people together? Because I kind of see it as an A&R in a way as well.
Yeah, there's loads of things. I mean, I think, you know, like the whole Keeping Time thing, you know.
Is, for Mad Villainy.
Yeah, which leads to, you know, for example, I mean, literally when Otis at that time was doing Yesterday's New Quintet, part of the process of figuring out Yesterday's New Quintet for him was doing records of covers. So some of the early ones he did were like, he did a cover of he did a whole record of Stevie Wonder covers. He did a whole record of Roy Ayers covers. And then he did a whole record of Azimuth covers. And then we took that, it was really like a demo, you know, it was like really just him figuring it out. And we played it to the drummer from Azimuth, and he was super excited. And then they ended up making a record together, which became Jackson Conti.
I actually bought that in Belfast. I seen it one day and was like, this is
produced that.
Yeah.
So that was, you know, like those kinds of things. And I didn't need to produce it. It was just, you know, it wouldn't have happened if I wouldn't have, you know, what us do. Like, you just got to put his feet to the fire, be like, bro. But I mean, in the end, we mixed it. You know what I mean? It was like, he was just like, yeah, whatever. Let's make it happen, you know. So, I mean, and it's always, you know, it's super, let's see, you know, there's a Denise project that I've kind of spoken into being, which hopefully will see the light of day at some point. I'm not sure what's going on with it right now, but, you know, sometimes these things take time. Certainly this Supremes thing feels like another one of those, you know. And musically, you know, there's all kinds of people on that project, you know. There's like Detroit people like Wajid. You know, Wajid has done one of the tracks for it. Obviously Sly Fifth Ave's done some work on it as well. Okay. Quantic, Denise, Negro Impacto. So that'll be a nice little soundtrack.
That's class.
If we
love Negro Impacto's work, so good.
Man.
Yeah.
Great people. So, and it's super fun to have them involved in this project. You know, it was really like putting together like a super group, kind of trying to fill in all the parts of, like, we basically reenacted for the film. We reenacted some of the, I don't know if reenactment is the right word, but we kind of re-embodied.
Okay.
Maybe that's a better way to say it. Some of the tour. and did a show here in Limerick and filmed it. And that was the band, basically. So Sly with his drummer Jackie, Quantic, Negro Impacto, Denise, Kate Rock, and Chi-Chi was the third singer from Negro Impacto. So it was pretty, and then young Michael had to sit in. Citrus sat in for a couple of songs, which was pretty epic as well. Yeah, felt right. Not like the Supremes had a rapper, but
yeah.
but it was great. He's great, fantastic. So I mean, there is, I guess that's A&R, I guess, but for me, it's kind of like it's also casting. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
There's a kind of whole other aspect to it, but I don't. It's not like I actually I don't see there being kind of, there's some crazy compartmentalization. It's
no.
What I mean? It's just like, oh, that felt right. Like, they feel like the right people. I don't know if they can act. I'm not really asking them to act. I'm just be yourself. Like, you don't want to have to be Mary Wilson. You know what I mean? You don't have to be, just come and show up. We'll figure it out. That kind of shit. But I've always worked that way. I like working that way. I like more. If it feels like the possibility is for it to be contrived, I am the other direction.
Yeah.
I've I won't say it's fear, but the thing that I aim away from is contrivance. I feel like contrivance doesn't help necessarily. Although there are people, I appreciate people that have practices that are about contrivance. I mean, Kneecap on some fundamental level is about a kind of contrivance.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It took me a while to get over that hump with them and just be like, there's deliberate contrivance here. It can still be good. You know what I mean? It take a while. You know what I mean?
I think there's something in hip hop, especially with that makes it more difficult to enjoy for a lot of people as well.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's interesting because Ireland seems to have, and maybe this is just like anecdotal, but it seems to have more of that than other countries in some respects.
Maybe, yeah, maybe. So but these are just, there's strategies for getting at kind of realities that I'm more interested in. I don't necessarily, there's the people who work this way, and that's only the kind of work that I'm interested in. There's also people, like I've also done work with people like David Axelrod, who wrote every note. Erykah Badu, control freak industries. People are just, no, I need to be in control of everything. And it's like, for me, I don't know. The less I'm in control, the more interesting it is to me. The less it's about me, the more interesting it is to me. So, but that's me. You know what I mean? There's lots of ways to peel an orange. You know what I mean? So it's like, So
something I've been really interested in recently is like I'm working on these couple documentary projects, and then I did a interview with Lil Lewis, who have you heard of him?
I've heard of Little Louie, but maybe it's Little Lewis too.
Yeah. So it was really interesting conversation where he is releasing a film that is kind of exposing his role in Chicago house, the culture, and how it's underrepresented and other people's role is underrepresented.
Yeah.
To what extent it's like an altruistic thing versus other notions, I'm unsure. The interview was interesting, at least, but he's definitely unveiling like a lot of stuff that is just not showcased in the history.
Of course.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like he was talking about how he's the founding father of Chicago house culture. So like the clubs and stuff like this. So he was DJing in clubs in the 70s as a teenager. But he actually told a story about MC Hammer coming to one of his clubs and saying that a lot of his style actually came from this thing. And there's all these weird connections going on that are just lost to history that you just would never know otherwise. And a lot of the people that featured in the documentary don't feature in any of the other histories. It's the same thing you're hearing over and over again. It's like Frankie Knuckles, all these other people, and obviously that is all true, but it's what's not told that just completely can change the story.
Something as simple as you sort of imagining, like let's say hip hop. We've been told the same Kool Herc story for the past sort of 30 years, and it's really only in the last sort of 10 years that we realized, well, Kool Herc is just one guy.
Yeah.
There's a constellation of DJs, mobile DJs, all kinds of guys that are all in their own way kind of on the same page and kind of contributing, and maybe he is the most important or maybe he isn't, but it's very little exists as one version. You know what I mean? There's, you know, a story about soul music long after its best before date, quote unquote. You know what I mean? In 1981, you know, Motown music, when the number one record in the country at that time is Soft Cell. You know what I mean? Which is doing a Where Did Our Love Go? You know what I mean? Medley with Tainted Love. Long after the best before date, can potentially tell you something about that period. Is not necessarily the way, you know, that's not really the way we think of but none of this stuff is linear. No. You know what I mean? And Little Louis, we would have said, but is somebody who, you know, clearly has a very clear vision of how it worked from his perspective, and we need to, you know, we don't necessarily need to take a sort of more traditional Marxist perspective here and sort of understand that it will not erase what exists as far as our notion of Chicago House. It will merely enrich it, and expand our understanding of what's going on. And that's important. I mean, that's really what it's about. Like, because too often, you know, when things get oversimplified for our consumption, we lose a lot of the kind of, you know, connective tissue, if you will. That affords, because a very rich tradition, dude. And I mean, I think, you know, even the journey across the Atlantic, you know, things get lost. You know, like spend a weekend in Detroit, go to up-tempo clubs, see middle-aged black people in suits, in their Sunday bests, dancing to up-tempo music, and realize that that's where techno came out of. That's hard. Like, that's like, whoa. You know, I remember the first time we went to the Detroit Electronic Music Festival, whatever it's called. Me and Eric going to see Moody Man play and just being like, whoa, this is not the audience that he would get if he was in LA at all. You know what I'm saying? The people in LA don't go to listen to music like this. And realizing like, whoa, this is a far more complicated and rich experience than, you know, and as people who are really interested in this shit, like, you know what I mean? There's, in LA recently, there's a Dilla house night. It was a night where they were like exploring the kind of up-tempo influences on Dilla. And it's like, you know, you don't even begin to think of that, like, you know. Not at all. But then, of course, I mean, he's there in the D. I mean, the most important shit in the D at that time. Even if it's unintentional, there's no way you can avoid that. Can't be avoided. You know? But I mean, you know, Wajid is not. It's not some kind of crazy coincidence that Wajid is a house DJ now. Like, it's not, you know, like, and sees no barrier there at all. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's like, you know, whereas at one particular time, you know, people, you know, house clubs didn't allow hip hop, or vice versa. You know, like, that was for somebody else. Whereas, like, you don't realize, like, at the source, those two things are side by side, and they might be totally influencing each other. You know, and that's kind of like that the symmetry of these relationships you're talking about. That, like, if you hone in on something too much, you're missing out on the stuff around the edges. I actually only started reading the Dan Charnas book. Have you read it on Dilla? I mean, I'm in a book. Oh, you're in a good bit of it. I mean, that's embarrassing. Like, I've literally only read the first 10 pages. Like, I've just got it. Yeah, hit me back when you get a chance. Okay. Or just go to the index and you'll see. Okay, sick. No, Dan Charnas is an old friend. Okay. I knew Dan Charnas in the 90s. You know, Dan Charnas was in LA. He was working for Rick Rubin. Rick Rubin had split from Russell Simmons, and started a label in LA, and it was mostly rock what he was doing, but he had a small hip hop. In fact, Chino XL, rest in peace, was one of Dan Charnas' first signings, actually. And he was in LA, and he was doing radio, and he was a good dude. And then he did a book about the history of the hip hop, a kind of business history of hip hop, which is really, really interesting, called Paid in Full. You know, he did the sort of 90s thing, and then he went back to school, and then he did this book, which was very successful. And then he reached out and he said he was going to do a book about Dilla. And I was just like, okay. Good luck with that, But then I realized he was very serious. And so then I told him, look, I don't know if this, I'm not trying, I'm telling you this not to take credit or anything, because Dan Charnas is a really important force and a very important writer in his own right. But I said to him, I said, unless you're doing something as good as the book by Robin Kelly on Monk, I don't think you should do it. And the Robin Kelly book on Monk is that thick, and it's, for me, it's the greatest musical biography I've ever read. It's about Thelonious Monk, but it took 15 years. I mean, it's a fucking tome. It's an incredible. I mean, just as a book about American history, Robin Kelly is, if you don't know who he is, Robin Kelly is one of the most important figures, American historians, and you would know a lot more about him if he wasn't so important in the BDS movement.
Okay, right.
And that's a real good way to get yourself erased. But Dan went off, read the Monk book, and came back and was like, woof. He was like, we can only aspire. And I was like, now you have it. So try to do that. And then he really, really, really did something special there, dude. I mean, there is that's the definitive hip hop biography, hands down.
Yeah, it's crazy, because even though I'm like 15, 20 pages in, it's already talking about the parallels between how Detroit was built and how that was interrupted, and the rhythm of the shape of the streets, and it's obviously going to make a parallel to the music, but crazy.
It's, I mean, if you want to know about hip hop, that's the book. I mean, I can't, don't just cut to that. That's really,
I think it's one of them as well, like, especially with someone like Dilla, it has to be treated with so much care, and there's going to be a lot of people that are expecting a lot.
Just, I don't know if this is even relevant to what we're doing now, but you should know this. So what Dan Charnas' process for writing that book, which for me was very, very important, and I'd never seen somebody formalize it in the way that he did, but what he did was he did these things called readbacks. Okay, so basically what he would do is, so I'm a minor figure in this story, but I mean I'm in a lot of the book because kind of there's a few kind of important parts of Dilla's story where I happen to be there or adjacent or whatever. But what he would do with me, for example, is he would call me and say, okay, so the parts of the story I'm interested in is this. I want you to tell me the best details you can about Dilla going to Brazil. Okay, tell him the story. He called me back like 4 months later. Say, you got a few minutes? I'm good. Shoot. It's like, okay, I'm going to read you now how I've incorporated your interview into the story.
Okay.
So he read me the 3 or 4 pages where they talk about Dilla going to Brazil. I said, does that sound right to you? Have I, obviously I've edited and I've changed your words around a little bit to fit.
Taken from your context into the
wider story.
Yeah.
Does it feel right? Did I do you right? Is there any of it feels off? Is there any of those words feel like it doesn't adequately, describe how you feel? And he, whatever I would tell, it doesn't sound, I wouldn't have said that. He'll fix it right there on the spot. And he did that with everybody. Like D'Angelo, Tip, people that are impossible to get on the phone. He did that with everybody. So when you're reading that book, you're not just reading, a normal, the way these things are done. You're reading something that was done and redone and redone and redone with the kind of care, that you need to tell a story like that in a way, in the way that it deserves, really. You know what I'm saying? So he's absolute hats off to that guy, man. He's a wonderful guy, wonderful, generous, hardworking dude. Yeah. He had taught, basically after the book on the history of hip hop business came out, he started teaching at the Clive Davis Institute at, I think it's at NYU or Columbia. And he taught a class on Dilla. I mean, there's a lot of classes on Dilla, but that one is really not as a musician, as a historian. He started to teach this class, and then he started to go back and forth to Detroit. Like he would bring his class to Detroit. Wow. And then out of that experience and by then obviously using the class as a way to invite people to, let's have Pete Rock come and talk about Dilla. Let's have Tip come and talk about Dilla. Let's have Ma Dukes come and talk about that. Let's have B Plus come and screen. We'll screen Sweet for Ma Dukes, and we'll have B Plus talk about his Dilla. And through that, then he built enough of a network to be able to. But I mean, that's a lot of work, bro. I mean, all this type of shit is a lot of work.
Yeah,
but
that's another level.
That's another level.
And because you can fact check stuff, like even on something that I'm doing, I tried to corroborate a story, and you're going back and forth to people, and this is the whole thing about documentation. Like a lot of the stuff that I'm doing for this project I'm working on, there's no video evidence, there's no photo evidence, it's all memories. So it's all whatever their version of the truth or their memory of it is, and trying to actually corroborate something that even matches up with all these people, it's near impossible.
I mean, Supremes. I mean, I have court stuff, and the court stuff's even more lacks credibility than half the oral histories I have.
Yeah.
It's just like, they accepted that? But, this is history. I mean, that the real job is, I mean, my argument would be, and this is going back to the Little Lewis thing, it's not that, this is dialectical. You have to think things dialectical. There are oppositional stories. There are reasons why they're oppositional. There are reasons why he feels like he's been erased. There are reasons why this became the actual story that everybody knows. Somehow those things in dialogue with each other, somewhere in there is a truth, but it's not a truth that you should feel like you point out. It's a truth that will be decided by history itself.
Yes, and you can showcase everything that's going on,
yeah,
and people can interpret it that way.
Yes.
Yeah.
And to hold those things in tension in a way where people feel like they're understanding, that's the trick.
That's
the hard
difficult.
Part.
Yeah.
That's the hard part.
It's interesting as well. I think Lil Lewis's kind of inspiration for all that came from his father, Bobby Sims. He was a blues musician,
yeah,
and kind of on his deathbed, I told him, like, I was kind of missing in parts of history. Your mum, who was signed to Chess Records as well, was kind of not noted through history, and he's like, don't let your part in Chicago House go missing, because once the oral history's gone, like, that's it, for a lot of this stuff.
Oh, it's gone.
Yeah,
it's gone. And I mean, it's just like, it's too important to just let it, it's too important to let it slip. I mean, that's the job, right? It's like, just.
I think one of the best stories I ever heard was from Robert Glasper. I interviewed him a few years ago, and he told me about him and Jay Dilla, and who was his musical director at the time?
Kareem? No.
It'll come to me. Someone that was in the Soulquarian, but it'll come to me. But they went to Detroit, and the first person that they were sent to work with was Dilla, and he would test the records in strip clubs, like unfinished, just to see how people reacted. And if people reacted in the strip club, they'd bring them back, and they'd be like, "That's the one that you go with." Crazy.
Well, I mean, it's the part of the Dilla story that people, the dude spent a lot of time in strip clubs. I mean, he has 2 daughters by women that work there. So, like, he was extraordinarily shy, extraordinarily kind of to himself type of dude that would go down the rabbit hole. We were just saying, like, people, you see him for 3 weeks, they're there every day, 12 hours a day, and then boom, disappeared. You don't see him for 3 months.
Yeah.
He was that kind of dude. But his one outlet, that was the thing. Go to the strip club. So I remember, we were doing Sweet for Ma Dukes. Like, we were, his mom told us, that's the one he would go to Tuesdays and Fridays, and that's the one he would go to if he went out of a Monday, and that's the one if he was, So we went and made photos of those buildings. But again, this isn't the sort of stuff that, you'll find it in Dan's book, but it isn't the kind of part of the mainstream.
Popular consciousness.
No, it's this kind of character out of Charlie Brown, hunched over a drum machine, looking cute with his baseball cap tilted to the right angle. That's just like a tiny, like little iconographic part of the story. Yes, he was that too, but that's not the only story.
Yeah.
So that's funny shit.
I think we can kind of wrap it up there. That was, a sick conversation. Thank you so much for coming through.
No worries. Happy to do it.
Is there anything you want to plug before the end of this? Nah.
I don't think so. Get Ghost Notes. There's still copies of Ghost Notes left. Ghost Notes is a book of photographs that I did Kind of mid-career retrospective, but there's still copies out there. You can get it. That's a good thing to, if you're interested in seeing more of the work. Ghost Notes, Music of the Unseen. Something to, put your hands on if you can.
Amazing.
Otherwise, just find me on the gram. Be Pleasel.
Send some music.
What?
Send some music.
Send me music. I'm always hyped to hear music, man. I'm always happy to find something new that not all the homies know about. I'm that type of person. I'm always happier for to find the music I've never heard before. You know what I'm saying? Like I'm always on the continuing search for the scratch the itch that can't be scratched.
Yeah.
So happy for that shit always. And it's good to just be in touch with people. I'm always, I'm always happy to know what people are doing. It's always sort of encouraging and inspiring to see people, even at the most basic levels, actually trying to give it a go. That's what it's about, basically, right? Like, so, it's good to be in touch with people. So, yeah.
Class. Thanks so much. We can wrap that now. Peace.
Peace.